Breaking through this extremely imposing obstacle to get directly into South Korea has always been very dangerous and risky, which is why very few have ever successfully managed to do it. Historically, the comparatively easier but still extremely difficult path to escape out of North Korea was by attempting a run across the northern border into either China or Russia. At the same time, this was also historically the easiest border to smuggle illicit contraband into North Korea from as well. You see, North Korea maintains an official military alliance with China, and while relations have often still been strained between the two, they're nothing like the outright hostility seen on North Korea's southern border. As a result, there is little need for North Korea to keep hundreds of thousands of soldiers deployed here, because the risk of an invasion coming from China is fairly minimal. Simultaneously, North Korea's border with Russia is very tiny, at only about 17 kilometers. And North Korea's relations with Russia are also similarly warm, so there's never really been a big need to park soldiers along the small border here to deter a potential Russian invasion. Moreover, the North Korean border with China is massive. It stretches and winds for more than 1,300 kilometers as it generally follows the Yalu and Tumen rivers, through rugged mountains and forests that are mostly very sparsely populated. Thus, for most of North Korea's history, this long border in the north with China has been lightly patrolled and guarded, and so it has been fairly porous and relatively easy to smuggle both goods and people across. This was especially true during the winter months when the Yalu and Tumen rivers freeze over, enabling defectors and smugglers alike to simply walk across them, or during the summer months when the river's depths are at their lowest, enabling defectors and smugglers to just easily wade across them. But the biggest problem with this route for defectors was that once they crossed the border into either China or Russia, they still weren't exactly safe. Both Russia and China have extradition agreements in place with the North Korean government, meaning that any North Korean defectors they catch will be treated as illegal immigrants rather than as refugees, and deported back to North Korea, where they will face immediate imprisonment and potentially even execution. That's why for nearly every defector who did escape across the border into China or Russia, the goal wasn't to stay there, but to eventually make their way into a neighboring safe country, which there are precious few of. Myanmar and Laos were always out because, just like China and Russia, they will immediately deport any North Korean defector they catch in their territories right back to North Korea. For the most part, that only left Mongolia, Thailand, or Vietnam as nearby safe countries the defectors could flee towards because, since South Korea considers all North Koreans to be their own citizens as well, these three countries will deport any North Korean defectors they catch to South Korea instead. So the plan for defectors was to always cross the porous mountainous border into China, and then, eventually, gradually, make their ways to Mongolia, Thailand, or Vietnam, where they would then immediately surrender to the local authorities there and get deported on a plane to safety and a new life in South Korea. Defections out of North Korea only truly began to spike, however, in the 1990s after the Soviet Union collapsed at the end of 1991, which had been the primary financial supporter of the North Korean regime. Then, with its primary financial benefactor and supporter gone, and heavy financial sanctions placed upon it by the United States, Japan, and South Korea, North Korea suddenly found its economy and agriculture unsustainable. With very little money and hardly any ability to import farming equipment or fertilizer, with food imports from the Soviet Union gone, with exacerbating droughts and floods, and with a base of less than 20% of their land even being considered arable in the first place, North Korea couldn't acquire enough food to sustain its entire population, and the worst famine in the country's entire history followed. Because of the North Korean government's incredible levels of secrecy, nobody really knows exactly how bad the famine during the 1990s was, but estimates range from about 300,000 deaths on the lower end to as many as 3.5 million on the higher end, across only 4 years between 1994 and 1998. With masses of people desperate to escape from the famine, defections out of North Korea consequently began to spike.